As I often say in politics, the day she runs against me, I'm done. But I will gladly turn it over to her. So, and I know as a state legislator really how tough their work is. People forget, you know, they always want to know where you're going in politics. Are you going to be in Congress? Are you going to be in the United States Senate? Do you want to be the president? The real work happens at the local level, the school boards, the city councils, the people who have to tough it out with their friends and neighbors, and in the state legislature, where we have incredibly dedicated people who work for very low pay, very little staff, and they're on the front lines. You know, I know from serving there for 8 years, that's when you're in the position to meet your friends and neighbors at the grocery store and have to answer, you know, every question that they have. That's where all the tough budget decisions get made. And I, frankly, am very grateful that I had 8 years in the legislature to work on the things that Hannah's talking about, to learn a bipartisan spirit, to think about common sense, how to talk to things about your friends and neighbors. As many of you know, and you heard, I started out in Knox County in a Republican district. So as a Democrat, you know, always learning to think about, you know, what will this do for small businesses? What will it do for my friends and neighbors in the fishing community? How will this affect the property taxes, the school funding? Very important lessons, and I'm thrilled that I've been able to take those to Washington. And honestly, to be a part of a delegation where, as you heard earlier, not only do we have a majority of women, which is very unusual, but we have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, Mike Michaud and I, and obviously Senator Collins and Senator Snowe, and work very closely together on those issues that affect Maine. You know, you often hear about, as Hannah said, you know, the volatile things up in the headlines, the ideological issues, or the places where we differ. But frankly, this is a delegation where I can say without question that our staffs work closely on any issue, whether it's a funding issue for the city of Portland, whether it's taking care of our veterans, whether it's all the exciting things going on with renewable energy. I am just very proud to be both a representative from the 1st District, but also to work so closely with people who care so deeply and have so much experience working for their state. So first, let me just say thank you for having me here. Thank you to all of you who made it possible for me to represent you. It is a true honor to represent the people of the 1st Congressional District, certainly to be the first woman in that position, but also to be in Washington at what has been a very challenging time. I'll throw out a few more facts and figures, but I know all of you, you're living it every day, and as Hannah said, the impact of this difficult economic time, really the biggest economic downturn nationally since the Great Depression, huge challenges. To be in Congress at that moment in time is, you know, kind of a be careful what you wish for thing. You know, we don't take these jobs just to do the easy stuff, but I didn't know it would be quite this hard. And I didn't know we would have to make so many difficult decisions over the first year and a half, but I have been very glad to be there. As all of you know, there's been a very tough unemployment situation. We've lost 8.4 million jobs since December of '07. 1 in every 10 people in this country is unemployed, and 1 in 6 is underemployed, and we feel it deeply in Maine. We feel it particularly deeply because, as I learned serving in the legislature in the 90s, Maine had been through a long period of losing our manufacturing base, losing many of our natural resource bases in the fishing and farming industry, and seeing huge economic changes, and many of you are on the front lines of trying to figure out what the next new economy will be in Maine. And I think that has added to some of the challenges that we faced. We feel like we're seeing tiny bits of good signs, and I hope that when we have a chance to do some questions and answers, all of you can talk to me a little bit about not only your questions, but your perceptions of what is going on out there. But I want to say a few things about what the federal approach has been to helping to deal with this. You know, sometimes there's a tendency, both because of the contentious nature of the federal government in this political time, but also because it seems like big, you know, what's that big anonymous government? We forget about the incredible role that the federal government plays in a state like Maine. We're a receiver state when it comes to Medicaid funding, helping our senior citizens, roads and bridges, development of our infrastructure in this state, economic development in the defense industry. You know, Maine has changed a little bit, but we used to be the 6th most defense-dependent state in the country, and most people don't realize that. But when you think about the jobs impact of Pratt & Whitney, Bath Iron Works, the Kittery Naval Shipyard, we have a tremendous amount of defense jobs and defense-related jobs, all dependent on the federal dollar, frankly, all dependent on that investment. We are almost 1/5 of our citizens are veterans or active duty personnel in the military. So the retiree benefits, the health care, the issues issues around even having a commissary at the Brunswick Naval Air Station are all huge issues for those of us who think about the federal impact. And you can imagine, in my first year of the legislature with a daughter who was trying to balance huge holes in the budget, that I didn't really fear my constituents. I feared the call from Hannah, which almost every week would be, "Mom, so is there going to be any more transportation money in that bond issue, or in that Recovery Act? So, Mom, how much of that money is out, and when are we going to actually see that? Hey, Mom, what about the FMAP money? We have a big Medicaid hole here, and we can't book it in the budget till we know you guys are going to pass that. And, of course, you know the rate of progress in the Congress. You know, we barely get something passed, and then it gets slowed down in the Senate. Or, you know, so for the last couple of months when they've been doing this last difficult budget push, I just had to look at my caller ID and say, oh, no, it's Hannah. I can't take it. You know, make the staff call Hannah back and say, well, the House passed that bill, but it's waiting over in the Senate. You know, COBRA extension for people's health care benefits, unemployment extension, which frankly the Senate never even got to before we went on recess. Anyway, it has been a very challenging time to make sure that that important federal impact that we have on Maine, it continues to come. But let me just talk about a couple of examples, and I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for all of your questions. But the first big thing that Congress did when I got there was the Recovery Act, and we've talked about a lot about that. But I think often people don't realize exactly how that comes into Maine. Maine was one of the first states to obligate all of its transportation dollars. Maine did an incredibly good job getting that money out there, and probably some of you were bothered by road construction last summer, but that meant that people were going back to work, and we were investing $145 million in roads and bridges, nowhere near enough to take care of our aging infrastructure, but important to do. $35 million went to clean drinking water, which is important for many municipalities. Another $35 million for wastewater, and I know the city of Portland could use a lot more to deal with stormwater drainage, but all those things are out there and working right now. $25 million, very exciting, to extend the rail service to Brunswick. One of my interests in the state legislature, and I couldn't be more excited that Amtrak is going to continue to go to Brunswick, and you can imagine my next goal is to get it all the way to Rockland, because I do think that's important for economic development in our state, for tourism, and just for public transportation that we care so much about. $25 million to broadband access. Now, you're lucky to be in the city of Portland, where most people have high-speed access, but representing many rural communities and many coastal and island communities, as I do, one of the huge issues for economic development is, do you have access to broadband? Can you get that high-speed access? And, you know, it's hard to remember, but there are a lot of people who still are on dial-up today, and try to imagine running your business today on dial-up. As Hannah mentioned, we own an inn, bed and breakfast, a restaurant on the island of North Haven. Well, if people can't get onto our website, if we can't have high-speed access on our website, they can't find out what we look like, and they can't see all those great photos of the islands and of the wonderful food we serve. So, you know, it's really important for suppliers, as we know. It's critical, and we're anxious to continue to do that more. I wanted to tell one quick story about an individual business that was affected, but just to give you an idea of how some of the energy money worked in the Recovery Act. We hear a lot about the impact of energy money that came to the University of Maine at Orono that's going to be used for some of the research around offshore wind. Clearly a potential for Maine. I'm sure you've all had Angus and others come and speak before you, but lots of exciting things could happen if we could become an offshore wind producer here in the state of Maine. But here's a small company called Tex-Tech in Monmouth. They actually make a variety of interesting products, including the fuzzy thing that go on tennis balls, you know, the little fuzzy outside. So they do that in Monmouth. They also have a factory in China. Rising costs, particularly rising energy costs, and one of the things they were looking at was, should they move their Monmouth jobs to China? Well, luckily they applied for a grant and were funded under the Recovery Act to replace a 1960s boiler that was run on No. 2 heating oil. Now they're going to be using wood chips. Now they're going to save about $500,000 a year as a result of that grant that allowed them to make that investment. And 45 or 50 good-paying jobs are going to stay here in Maine, and they'll be able to think about expanding here in Maine, not what other country can we go to. So that is a huge part of the Recovery Act, is thinking about, as Hannah mentioned, the #1 issue. How do you bring back jobs? And a lot of what we did in the Recovery Act, frankly, was just saving those jobs. And it's tough to keep them. You know, as many people know in the city of Portland, it's tough to keep those jobs here. Some of that money went to education, to keep teachers working, fire, police, a whole variety of people who we often forget the important role that they play till we see what happens when the budget is cut. And that will be and is part of our continuing concerns.